So, Ezra Hashem, it's brought down when an Adam Guttle dies, so a lot of the ruchnius and a lot of the kedusha that he created with his life is like available for the taking. And a person can actually take some of those madregas and incorporate them in their own life. So Be'ezras Hashem, in fact, one of the inyanim of going to a levaya is that you can actually be kaina some aspects. But like everything else, it's not a memela. It's not like, you go to sleep and the next morning you wake up, Shas. But through your Yegiya B'Torah, there'll be a special siyata d'shmaya because you've incorporated some of the tzaddik kinyanim. So I hope Mr. Hashem should be zeicha. Okay. So I think we finished. We finished the first parak of Evan Shelaima. So make us see him on the parak. Parak Aleph was called, just look at the title, Yevayer kol darchei shvira samidai sarais b'derech chlal, shehu shayrish kol avedas Hashem yisparach. Right? So chapter 1, Parak Aleph was called The Ways of Breaking Your Midais Ra'is, but it's called b'derech klal, in a general way, meaning Parak Aleph does not deal with specific midais ra'is. But if you remember, there was the general guideline. And once again, b'kitzur, the general guideline is fairly simple, and that is you have to work, number one, within the framework of your nature. Don't try, as it were, to go keneged your nature legamri. And number two, you have to be gradual, meaning to say, and yet, there's number three. There are three principles. Two of them seem to be in contradiction. Principle one, I'll go in a different order. Principle one is based on the Rambam, that a person should strive to be in the middle. Don't go to one extreme or the other extreme. But when you have a midah ra, because you're to the other extreme, you need to go temporarily to the opposite extreme in order to get in the middle. So the example would be, in terms of generosity to others, a person should be in the middle, meaning to say, if you're too generous with your time and your money, you will not be able to support your family, and you'll never learn any Torah, because anyone who comes to you, you're going to talk to. On the other hand, if you're so cruel that you don't care about people, so b'chiyai gavna as well, that's a very bad midah. So let's assume, to give a specific example, that a person b'teva is so selfish that he refuses to give anything to anybody. So the way he improves his midah is to go to the other extreme and give everything away. The mashal would be if you have a tree that is crooked. So in order to get it to grow up straight, you got to pull it to the other extreme. So even though the ultimate goal is to be in the middle, but in order to reach that ultimate goal, you sometimes have to go to an extreme for a certain zman. Now neither the Rambam nor the Gra defines what that zman is, but there's a certain zman. So that's point one. You got to sometimes go to the extreme in order to get to the middle. Point two is that you have to do it in a gradual way. Because if you try to do too much too fast, you're going to crash. You have to do it lot. Now, some people raise the question that those two principles seem to be in contradiction. On one hand, you're telling me, be an extremist. On the other hand, you're telling me, go in moderation. Right? They're just superficially, they seem to be opposite directives. But not really. In order to reach the extreme that you need to reach in order to be in the middle, you need to do it somewhat gradually. Meaning if you try to go to the extreme too fast, then you're going to fail, you're going to crash, right? So it's not a stira. Moderation is how you get to the extreme, which in turn will bring you to behavioral moderation. In other words, in a sense, your goal is moderation in the middle. But to achieve the goal of moderation in the middle, I got to go to the extreme. But I go to the extreme in a moderate way. in a gradual way, right? So the term moderation, I mean, that's an English term, that's not used in the Sefer, obviously. Moderation is used in two different ways. Moderation is both an ultimate goal, but it's also the means by which you get to the extreme, which is the hechi timtza, to bring you to the ultimate goal of moderation, right? So this notion of moderation is used in two different ways. The third principle is, which really ties into gradualism actually, is you have to work within your teva and don't necessarily try to change your teva. This is called chanoch l'naro pidarko, that you train your child according to his way. Everyone has a particular derech. Now, in a sense, this is really a very similar point to the notion of moving gradually. Because as you move gradually, your teva can change, la'at la'at. But when you try to radically change your teva, you're setting yourself up for failure. Now, this is especially important not only in our own Avodah, but it's extremely important how we raise children and how we teach Talmidim. You have to work within a person's nature. To expect, now that may vary with age, to expect a 5-year-old to sit quietly for 3 hours at a long Shabbos meal is not realistic. It's not realistic. A kid, I mean, there may be an exception, but b'derech klal, a child cannot sit quietly a long time in one place. So if your child has to get up and run around, or even if an adult has to get up and walk around, or whatever it would be, you know, no big deal. I mean, there's nothing to make an issue over. Like, you know, if my child lies, if my child hits, if my child insults, if my child is mavaza people, that's an issue that I, as a parent, am mechuyev in the chinuch of my child. If my child is a little restless or a little hyperactive, that's the way a child is. There's nothing wrong with it, b'yatzem. And to expect that a child go keneged his natural impulse, that's something that is not correct. That's a violation of chanoch l'naro pidarkei. In fact, the famous story already, it's been already a famous story that Rav Chaim Kanievsky was, of course, the Chazon Ish's nephew. The Chazon Ish had no children. The Stifler married the Chazon Ish's sister. So the story goes, when Rav Chaim Kanievsky was a little boy, the Stifler and Rav Chaim are walking with the Chazon Ish, and Rav Chaim Kanievsky starts climbing a tree. I'm not sure if it was Shabbos even, where you're actually not allowed to climb a tree, or it was during the week. And the Stifler was very embarrassed. He's walking with the Chazon Ish, and even though the Stifler was a guttle, but you need to understand, the Stifler was mavatal himself to the Chazon Ish. I mean, the Stifler, and their ages were not that different. The Stifler was not much younger than the Chazon Ish. But the Stifler regarded the Chazon Ish, I guess kind of the way Rav Chaim Volozhiner regarded the Vilna Gaon, even though Rav Chaim Volozhiner was one of the Gedolei Hador Mamish, but he was mavatal himself like a little Talmud to the Gra, and the Stifler was very much that tremendous awe of the Chazon Ish. So he's very embarrassed. He's walking with the Chazon Ish, and Rav Chaim Kanievsky is climbing a tree, and the Stifler kept on saying, "Get down, get down, get down." And the Chazon Ish says, children are supposed to climb trees. This is what kids do. And by climbing a tree and by looking at something above you, that's margil the child to look for things that are higher in life, higher meanings. These play activities are actually hachanos for various spiritual transformations. In fact, they have another story about the Chazon Ish. This is very interesting. It's a little enigmatic in a way. That who was it with? It was also with somebody who later became a famous guttle. For some reason, I can't remember who it was. That they were learning all night, and at around 4 a.m, everybody was tired. The Chazon Ish and his chavrusa were tired. So the Chazon Ish says, "Let's go swimming in a river." So they go swimming in a river, like 4 a.m, before it's still night, it's still dark. And the Chazon Ish starts splashing water on him, So the guy said, the person who was his chavrusa, who later says, "Why are you splashing water?" So the Chazon Ish says, if you can't splash water and have fun, you're not going to learn Torah well either. Because you got to have fun. You got to enjoy life. You got to appreciate the gift of life. And then when you have kind of that joy of life, it becomes the joy of learning Torah as well. So the Chazon Ish starts splashing water on the person. Again, this is not the image we have of the Chazon Ish so much. Chazon Ish, we think, a serious person. But the Mace, this is what it was, you know. This is the guttle who Taka enjoys. You know, every part of life is something that you enjoy. But be it as it may, though, the Chazon Ish specifically endorsed climbing trees. And this fits in with the Gemara that you don't try to be mishana a person's nature. You work with the nature. You don't try to be mishana it. And the Raya, you'll recall, is the famous Gemara in Shabbos that says if a person is born under the mazel of Mars, the red planet called Ma'adim, he will be a lover of bloodshed. But he'll either be a shochet or a mohel, or a robber, listim mizoyin, an armed robber who will kill people. So what is the yesod of that Gemara? It's a very important yesod. His avodah is not to learn to hate blood. Rather, take your love of bloodshed and use it in a good and positive way. And that's bechira. You have the bechira to be the shochet or the moel, mitzvahs, or to be a murderer. But it's not your avodah to train yourself to hate bloodshed, because your teva is a certain way. So we have to work within our teva, but we have to direct our teva in a way that it becomes used for good things rather than bad things. Right? That's a very big yesod, once again, in chinuch, that you don't try, so to speak, to change a nature. You try to direct a nature to a way that's good and positive. And in fact, in many ways, that could also be the ultimate yesod of mashal libay chafetz. Why is it such a big deal to learn the things that you enjoy? Because once again, your nature is connected to that type of thing, so we want to work with your nature instead of working against your nature. Okay, so this is really the yesodos of Perek Aleph. Now Perek Beis already will get into some specific bad midos and what you do, right? More specific things. And Perek Beis is called Bipratei Hamidos Harashiyos, the details of the head midos, meaning the midos that are the yesod, the foundation of other bad midos, meaning we're going to have three biggies, and they branch off into numerous subdivisions. And it's interesting that, again, this is going to be almost legamri based on the Gra and Mishlei. That's, if you look at the source of each paragraph, you'll see that. And it mentions that the midos harashiyos are kas, anger, taiva, lust and desire for sensual and material pleasure, and gaiva is pride, arrogance, ego. Now, it's interesting, this is a little different than the big three that is identified in Pirkei Avos. Right? Pirkei Avos also gives us a big three, right? We have a big three of good things. That, of course, is the famous statement, Al Shleisha Shemin Atzadik, Al Shleisha Devar Ma'olam Omed. The world stands on three pillars. Al HaTorah, on learning Torah. Al Avodah, the divine service of Korbanos and Tefillah. And Gemilas Chasadim, right? Everyone knows that famous Maimer Chazal, and we also know that the Avos, each of them represents one of these Amudim. Avram Avinu is the Amud of Chesed, and Yitzchak, there was a Korban, is the Amud of Avodah and Tefillah, Korbanos, and Yaakov Avinu, who spent 14 years in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver, represents the Torah. So, Kishem, that we have three things that Al Shleisha Dvar Ma'olam Omed. We have three things that are Maitzias Ha'adam in Ha'olam. They take a person out of the world, they destroy his world. And this is kina, jealousy, taiva, again, lust for sensual and material pleasure, and kavod. So one thing to note, I'm not sure I have an answer to this, but we'll see what happens, is that the three maharivam in the world, according to Pirkei Avos, this is Rabbi Elazar HaKapor, is kina, taiva, kavod. Now the Gra changes one of them, kas, or maybe changes two of them, but kas, taiva, gaiva. So let's see. Instead of kina, we put in anger. Taiva is the same. And instead of kavod, we put in gaiva. Now, kavod and gaiva, although it's not clear why the Gra changes the language, that's going to be stamakasha. Why doesn't he use the language of Chazal? But kavod and gaiva are kind of the same, meaning you don't have so much of a kasha other than the shinoi halashon, right? Kavod is I seek honor. Gaiva is by arrogance or pride. So we can more or less say that gaiva and kavod are a very similar idea. But what about the first one? Just thinking out loud, right? Pirkei Avos says it is kina that is bad, and this gets replaced by the notion of kas, anger. So is anger and kina actually the same? Or are they connected? Anger and jealousy. What is the shaykhus between them? Yeah.
When someone's jealous of somebody, they could get frustrated that they don't have that thing, that person is thinking, why not them?
Yeah, so the truth is, obviously, jealousy can give rise to anger. I look at that. But let's think, again, I'm going to say a very similar thought. Let's look at why a person gets angry. What makes a person angry?
Expectations.
Expectations, exactly right. I think something was coming to me. Well, either something good should have come to me, which it didn't, or vice versa, something bad happened to me, which it shouldn't. Meaning, I have a certain expectation that because of who I am, or whatever it is, something I should have gotten the job, I should have gotten the promotion, I should have gotten the award. And somebody else got it instead of me, right? So I'm angry. I'm angry because I have a certain expectation. So often that's going to be connected to jealousy. I'm angry because somebody else got it instead of me. So in many, many cases, there certainly will be a shaykhus between anger and jealousy. But it seems that anger is a broader concept than jealousy. In other words, you could say it this way. Almost any time there's jealousy, there'll be anger. But anger can exist without jealousy. For example, a person could be angry at themselves. Let's assume I'm angry because I felt I should have worked harder and I didn't. What type of idiot am I? Now that's anger. That's a genuine anger turned on yourself. But that's not correlated to jealousy. That's an anger regarding. So maybe what the Gra's Marames here is that since he wants to list Midos that are the shoresh of evil, so instead of calling it jealousy, he goes to something that is deeper than the jealousy. And that is the sense of anger in the sense of frustrated expectations. In other words, anger is a broader category than jealousy. Jealousy is a particular situation of anger, but anger is broader. And maybe the same thing with kavod and gaiva, and that is, kavod means I want kavod. That's a bad thing. But why is it a bad thing? Because there's an underlying midah of gaiva, meaning I think I deserve it more. In other words, the point is the Gra is modifying the language of Chazal because he's looking at things that are deeper than the particular behavioral things that Chazal identified. Of course, you still have a kasha, so why didn't Chazal talk that way? Why did Chazal look at symptom rather than cause? It's a good kasha. I mean, I don't have a complete yishuv why the Gra's 3 steps are not exactly Chazals. Right? Chazal have kina, taiva, v'kavod. The Gra has kas, taiva, v'gaiva. Just as a little aside, it's not really Nogeya, the Evan Shelaima, but it's a very, very beautiful machshava from Rav Tzadok that's kedai to share. You know, in last week's parsha, which is the parsha for Chutz La'aretz this week, so the Torah says we create three machanes. We have the machane Shechina, we have the machane Leviah, we have machane Yisrael, and then the Torah commands that we expel from the machane three categories of tuma. We expel from the machane the Mitzaira. We expel from the machane the Zav, the person with the gonorrheal discharge. And we expel from the machane a Tamei Mace. Okay, that's it. Vayishalchu min ha-machane kol sarua v'chol Zav v'chol Tamei Nefesh. Now Rashi is masbir from the Gemara in Pesachim that the degree of expulsion is not the same for all the three tumas. The Mitzaira is expelled from all three machanes. The Mitzaira is expelled even from Machane Yisrael. The Zav is expelled from Machane Shechina, which is the Mishkan, and Machane Leviah, but the Zav is allowed to be in Machane Yisrael. And then we have the Tamei Mace that is so makel that not only can a Tamei Mace be in Machane Yisrael, a Tamei Mace can even be in Machane Leviah, and the only Isser on a Tamei Mace is not to enter Machane Shechina. Right? That's what Rashi says, that each of these three tumos has a different level of expulsion from the Machane. Just Agav, just Derech Agav. This is the problem with going in the Harabayas, and this would also be the defense of those who go with the Harabayas. All of us, Bisman Hazeh, have a din of Tamei Mace, because if we've been in a cemetery, we are Tamei Mace, and we have no way of being Matarer ourselves, because we don't have the ashes of the Parah Aduma. Now, a Tamei Mace is allowed to be in Machane Yisrael, and a Tamei Mace is allowed to be in Machane Leviah, but a Tamei Mace cannot be on Machane Shechina. So the question is, what is the definition of Machane Shechina Bizman Hazeh? So Machane Shechina Bizman Hazeh corresponds to where the Azara, the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, would have been located. The courtyard where the Mizbeach is. So a Tamei Mace is Chayev Kores if he goes into the Azara and Kal V'chomer into the Heichel itself. Now, it is clear from many Makairos that the outer perimeter of the Har Habayis only has a din of Machane Leviah. It is not yet Machane Shechina because you haven't yet entered the Azara. And Doraisa, therefore, I could enter as a Tamei Mace, assuming I'm a Tamei Mace, I could enter any shetach of the Harabayas until I hit the Azara. Midrabanan, you cannot enter what is right before the Azara, which is called the Ezras Nashim. That's Midrabanan. But beyond the Ezras Nashim, a Tamei Mace could enter. Okay, Tamei Mace could enter. So, those who matir, mainly Dati Leumi world, but those who matir Kenisa, Laharabayas, will say, we're going to remain in the areas that are not yet the Ezras Nashim, and they have an assumption where those things are, and Memela, it's only Machane Leviah, and if it's Machane Leviah, we're allowed to enter. A Tamei Mace can enter Machane Leviah. So why do most Gedalim say, don't go in the Harabayas at all? They simply say that we don't have confidence that we're able to determine exactly where the Azara is and where the Ezras Nashim is. In other words, the point I'm making is, this is not a machlokas in principle. Everybody's maida that the shetach of the Harabayas that's outside of the Azara and the Ezras Nashim is mutter for a Tamei Mace. And everybody's maida that from the Ezras Nashim inward, is usher for a tamei mace. So the basic halachas, there's no machlokas. The machlokas is, how confident are you in being able to identify, right? If somebody told you, you want to, there's a minefield here, right? You're going to walk through a minefield, a mine might explode. But somebody says, listen, the mine is 3 inches from the footpath. So just stay on the footpath. You're 3 inches away. Everything is going to be fine. I don't know about you. I wouldn't be so comfortable walking 3 inches away from a landmine. What if I lose my balance or whatever it's going to be? Or what if the guy has a margin of error of 3 inches? You get blown up. Well, what do you want? 3 inches. I was off by 3 inches. Don't make such a big deal of it, right? So you have a similar problem here. To step as a tamei mace. Okay, the Ezras Nashim is a drabanan, but if it's the Azara Mamish, you're chayav kares. So you're going to tell me that, based on my reconstruction, it's not a problem. The Azara starts 6 inches from here. So the most gedolim have said not to do it, and the like. Now, another point I want to make, though. Even those who matter Knesset Harabayas, because they go to the area that's Machane Levia, there are a lot of people who are not allowed to go in Machane Levia. First of all, Zav cannot go, okay? So a Zav is a Zav. But a Balkari, who didn't go to the mikveh, anyone that has a seminal emission, has the halacha of a Zav. A Nida has the halacha of a Zava. So even if you matter Knesset Harabayas, you can't matter it for single women because they didn't go to the mikveh and they're nidos. And you also can't matter it for married women who are nidos. Okay, so even the matirim have to be maida that at least the outer rim of Machna Levia, the outer rim of the Harabayas is Machna Levia. So you have to be careful. Now, the fact that women go in the Harabayas, some of them don't keep mitzvahs, so that's a separate thing. But we're talking about from people who keep halacha, that most gedolim have said it's asur lagamre to go to the Harabayas. There's a minority of people that did permit it. By the way, one little story. Again, I don't want to give a whole share of the Harabayas because it's only peripheral to the Evan Shelaima, but there will be a connection actually. And that is, some people bring from the Rambam. The Rambam did not live in Eretz Yisrael. The Rambam was born in Spain, but eventually the Rambam lived in Egypt. But when the Rambam was a teenager, his father took the family to Eretz Yisrael briefly to escape Islamic persecutions. So the Rambam spent, I think it was less than a year, but he spent some time in Eretz Yisrael. And he was mispalel by the Kaisel Maravi. And the Rambam writes that he kept that day a Yom Tov his whole life, the day that he was Zoicha to be mispalel by the Makam HaChorban. But according to some versions, the Rambam says he went on the Harabayas and he davened. So this is a very controversial text. Some say it's Mezuyev, some say the Rambam didn't say it, but if you ever get into a discussion about Knesset Harabayas, and somebody will pull out something that the Rambam says he went on the Harabayas, be aware that this is a dispute whether the Rambam actually said it or did it. So it's not a davar pashut. Okay, but what I want to share with you from Rav Tzadok, and this will be Nogeya the Evan Shelaima, is why does the Torah have these 3 gradations where the Mitzayra is expelled from all 3 camps, and the Zav from 2 camps, and the Tamei Mace from only 1 camp, Machane Shechina Mamish? So Rav Tzadok says that the 3 tumos of Mitzayra, Zav, and Tamei Nefesh correspond to the 3 character flaws of Chazal, Kina, Taiva, V'Kavod. Mitzayra corresponds to jealousy, Zav corresponds to Taiva, Tamei Mace corresponds to Kavod. So we'll explain why. So when the Torah says, send out the Tameim, the Torah is saying, eradicate from your society the 3 devilish Tuma evils of Kina, Taiva, V'Kavod. Now, Why is a Mitzayra connected to Kina? Because the main chait that causes saras is Lashon Hara. Why do we speak Lashon Hara? It is often because of jealousy. Some guy is famous and rich and admired, and I'm not. So I'll have a very strong desire to pull him down by saying he's not so great. Right? As Rav points out, we're never comfortable if someone's up here and we're down here. In fact, this is the famous thing that executives like to do. They're sitting behind a big desk, and they're on a bit of a raised platform. So when you sit in front of them, they're higher than you. It's a famous old trick that intimidates you. Someone is like looking down at you, so to speak. So Rav says, if I'm uncomfortable because you're up here and I'm down here, there are two ways I could get over my discomfort. One is by raising myself, and the other is by pulling you down. Meaning, I'm uncomfortable because somebody learns better than me. I don't like the feeling of being inferior. So one thing I can do is learn and learn and learn till I elevate myself, even though that's not lishma. That is not lishma, but that's kinas sofrim. The jealousy of people who learn Torah is mar bechachma. So I want to elevate myself. The other way is I want to drag you down so you fail. And Rav says gravity is an easier force to work with, meaning it's easier for me to pull you down than to raise me up. And therefore, Lashon Hara a lot of times comes from jealousy. I want to pull somebody down. People say, in fact, that's the aside of the Gemara that the Gemara brought in Perek Aleph, that it's not proper to excessively praise somebody. Because by praising him over and over again, you'll cause people to say bad things about him. Now, the Gemara said there's an exception if somebody is meforsim in Midos tovos. But the basic idea is, when I hear about how great somebody is, there'll be an urge in me to kind of pull him down a little bit. So Rav Tzadok makes the logical connection that if tsaras is caused because of Lashon Hara in turn is caused because of jealousy. So there is a relationship between tsaras and the negative midah of kina. The negative midah of kina. Now, kina is totally bad. If it's the kina that I want to become better, that has a makom. That's a kina shelo lishma, kina sofrim mar bechachma. But the kina that I want you to fail, that has no makom in Klal Yisrael. That's an evil thing. It may be hard to get rid of. Even in dieting, there's psychological reports. Let's assume you have a group of people, and they decided to lose weight, right? And most of them, don't have the discipline, so they break down eating cake and everything. But one person sticks with it. There is a group dynamic in which they're going to encourage the person who is successfully dieting. Have some cake. You look so emaciated. What's wrong? And part of what's going on, even though they're friends, is, and it's scary, it's disheartening in some ways, they don't want that person to succeed. That person's success would be too bitter for them because they're not able to succeed in this. So sometimes, and this can even be with people that we care about, we want them to fail. And then we'll be really nice to them and say, don't be too hard on yourself. Okay, listen, okay. But we're actually happy that they failed. Right? So that's totally bad. Now again, it's a human trait, but that's totally bad. So Rav Tzadok says that's why it is sent out of all camps. Not only is it expelled from Machane Shechina and Machane Leviyah, but even Machane Yisrael, which is normal life, that's a symbol of normal balabatisha life, get rid of it. It's no good. So that explains why the Mitzayra is expelled from all three camps. Now, the Zav represents taiva, and that is obvious connection, right? What is a zav? A zav is a gonorrheal discharge, a sexually transmitted disease. Taiva. But here's the problem. Our relationship to taiva is a lot more complicated than our relationship to kina. Kina, at least in the abstract, I can say, totally bad, get rid of it. In the abstract. It may be very hard for me to get rid of it, but I know there's nothing good about it. Get rid of it. Taiva is very different, because to some degree we need to be attached to a certain amount of desire. Number one, we have to eat. Right? We have to sleep. We're supposed to get married and produce families, pru or vu. And not only that, but by appreciating the beauty in the world, whether it's color or music or flowers, we generate within our heart hakara satov to Hashem for the bria. Like the Chazon Ish I mentioned, you got to have a certain pleasure in life that enhances your avodas Hashem. So for me to say kina is all bad is a true statement, but I can't say that taiva is all bad, because I need a certain amount of taiva, both in terms of my physical survival and even in terms of my appreciation to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the world that he created. So here's what Rav Tzadok says. So as a result, the zav that represents taiva is permitted to be in Machane Yisrael. Because Machane Yisrael is normal life, normal people, regular people. Regular people are connected to taiva in a good way. But as you progress in life to the madrega of a Levi means someone that's totally musar to avodas Hashem, your connection to taiva will get weaker and weaker and weaker. Now this is an important subtlety, not through a self-conscious process of renunciation, but as a natural consequence of spiritual maturation. Let me explain what I mean. Most grown-ups, most adults, don't play with children's toys unless they're playing with a child. Right? I don't play with toys. Now, grown-ups can have their own toys. That's another muster shmooze. But they, generally speaking, are not going to play with children's toys. Now, what's the pshat? It's not the pshat that I say to myself, I'm a grown-up, I don't play with toys. No, it's memela. As you grow and you're more mature, the things that are childish don't interest you as much. So Rav Tzadok says, taiva is the same way. A certain connection to taiva is natural to a person. But as you grow in your avodas Hashem, it just becomes like a childish thing. You're just not as interested. It's not that I'm not going to have the cake because it's taiva. I don't think about it. I don't think about having it. It's not a thing for me anymore, because I'm involved in higher things. I tell a Mace, it's a little bit of a funny Mace. Somebody asked Rabbi Yashav Shaila, do you make, if it's Nagel Mace all the time, if you're having ice cream for dessert in a bread meal, so do you make on dessert you normally make a bracha on a dessert, like fruit. So do you make a shahakol on ice cream that you're eating at the end of a meal? Rav Yashav happens to paskin yes. Others say no. Others say you don't make a bracha on ice cream. So I'm not here to give you a psak on this. So, but the story goes, so the person was a Rosh Hashiva. He asked Rav Yashav, do you make a bracha rishona on ice cream at the end of a meal? So Rav Yashav didn't answer. Rav Yashav says, you eat ice cream at the end of a meal? He says, I'm not going to answer. He says, what is this? How can you eat ice cream at the end of the meal? He should have said, I'm asking for my kids, but whatever. But what's wrong eating ice cream? Right, so the idea, how does a person have a havamina for such things? That was the madrega. You grow out of it. In other words, in a sense, you look at these things as toys. It's not that I'm a tzaddik and I'm poresh, but I'm not interested. So Mamela, this is the remes. So in Machane Yisrael, which is ordinary life, The Zav, which represents Taiva, gains admission. But Machna Levia, Machna Shechina, you drop it. You're no longer involved in it anymore. Now, we now come to Tamei Mace. Now, this is the most complicated a little bit. A Tamei Mace represents Kavod. Now, the question is why? Why is Tamei Mace connected to Kavod? What's the shaychus? So Rav Tzadok points out that originally, Adam and Chava were supposed to live forever. We were given immortality. Why did death come into the world? Only because of the chait of the Eitz Hadas, right? It was the chait of the Eitz Hadas that brought death into the world. Now, what was the Nachash's hasasa? Meaning, how did the Nachash entice Chava to eat from the Eitz Hadas? Rav Tzadok says it was an argument based on kavod, because the Nachash said to Chava, Hashem knows, b'yayim achalchem mimenu, the day that you eat from this fruit, v'hayisem keleikim, you will be like God, Yodei Tov V'Ra, who will have a true knowledge and understanding of good and evil. Now, what the Nachash is claiming is quite difficult, but the Nachash is marketing this fruit as a God pill. I mean, imagine someone gave you a pill and said, take this pill, you'll be Hashem. Talk about the ultimate ego trip, the ultimate kavod, the ultimate power. Hashem doesn't want you to take that, but the Nachash says, God doesn't want you to eat this fruit because you'll be like God. So, what was the enticement that brought death into the world? The she'ifa, the yearning for kavod, for glory, ultimate ego gratification. And therefore death came into the world not just as a punishment, but as a reminder that we're not God. Because in many ways we are godlike. We are B'Tselem Elokim. Right? We have intelligence. We have free will. We have the ability to create many things. Not yesh me'ayin, but we create many things. We have the ability to destroy. We are godlike in our mastery over the world. But the ultimate reminder that we're not God is mortality. We don't live forever. Death is the great reminder to a human being that as great as you think you are not God. That's an important reminder. So it turns out that the tumah of death came because of kavod. And so you see the association. Saras represents jealousy. Zav represents taiva. Tumas Mace represents kavod. So now let's examine the last thing here, and that is the Tamei Mace is not only allowed in Machane Yisrael, but the Tamei Mace is allowed even in Machane Levia, and they're only excluded in the innermost camp, which is Machane Shechina. So here the word is very profound. On one hand, gaiva, arrogance, looking for kavod, is a very repulsive thing. The pasuk says in Mishlei, Tayavas Hashem kol gavalev. Arrogance and haughtiness is a tayeva. It's an abomination of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Gemara in Saita says that Hashem says to the Baal Gaiva, this world is too small for you and I to be in the world together. The Baal Gaiva pushes Hashem out of the world. That's one side of it. How maguna is Gaiva. At the same time, a sense of kavod, your worthiness, is essential in Avodas Hashem. Because if a person truly believed they were nothing, they were worthless, they were garnished, then what would the point be of my davening, of my learning, of my mitzvahs? The person is going to say, what? Hashem cares about my mitzvahs? Who am I? I'm a nothing. Why would God care about a nothing? Elamai, what must the person feel? I'm not a nothing. What I do makes a difference. What I do is important. I have the kayach to bring kedusha into the world. I have the kayach to be machriv ilamas with my averis. As the Nefesh HaChaim describes, every time you do a mitzvah averis, it's not just you. It's not just, oh, Baruch Hashem, I did a mitzvah, I get olam haba. or Baruch, or Chas v'Shalom, I do an Aveira, I'm going to get Gehenna. That's not what's going on here. I mean, that is true also. What is really going on here is you do a mitzvah, you affect the universe with Kedusha that comes in. You do an Aveira, you destroy worlds of holiness that will not become expressed. A person has to know how great they are, how chashuv they are, how their actions make a difference. You need a sense of kavod, because otherwise you'll have no motivation to do anything. So this is the paradox. This is exemplified by a famous mimer of Rav Bunim of Peshischa. I know that you all heard of this, that a person must keep in his pocket two contradictory ideas at all times. In pocket number one, Anoichi afar v'yefer, I am dust and ashes, I am nothing, I am worthless. I'm nothing at all. I'm dirt. In the other pocket, Bishvili nivra ha'olam. The whole universe was created because of me. Now this is taken from a Mishnah in Sanhedrin, right? The Mishnah in Sanhedrin points out Hashem made many cows and many sheep and many goats and many dogs and many cats. He made only one man and woman. Machlokas, is it a single joined creature or two, but only one man, one woman? Why? Why didn't Hashem make many people just like he made many cows? Right? It's not true that all cows come from one cow. Hashem made many cows and many bulls. That's how you get more cows. Right? But only one man and one woman. Answer? Because each person must say, because of me, this world was created. Now that's not arrogant, because the same way I say, because of me the world was created, I say because of you the world was created. So that's not making me better than you, but it makes me be makir, my chashivas. So, kavod is not only something you allow in ordinary life, which is Machane Yisrael, but even in Avodas Hashem, even in your learning, even in your davening, you have to have a sense of your chashivas. So the Tamei Mace that's connected to kavod is even admissible in Machane Leviah. But at a point at which you finally reach Devekus with Hashem, and maybe we'll never reach that. At that point, you don't need the ego. In other words, the ego is kind of like a rocket that gives you the propulsion to get out of the atmosphere by giving me the motivation. But once I'm truly with Hashem, I leave everything else behind. So the Tamei Mace, when you merge with the Shekhinah, you no longer have a sense of ego. Right? So this is Rav Tzadok's Nekuda, why the three Tameim are expelled from the different levels of the camp. Now Rav Tzadok, though, is operating with Chazal's lashon of kina, taiva, kavod. The Gra's lashon is a little different: kas, taiva, and gaiva. So next time we'll look at the Gra, and we'll go weiter in Perek Beis. Have a good Shabbos and be well.